everyone. I guess I should say first, what's cropping up, stockers? So I'm Zack the Stock Cropper. If you've seen me on the interwebs, on Twitter or the YouTubes, but around these parts, I just go by Zack Smith. And it's a privilege and an honor to have so many people here to see this thing 30 months after it was created. It just, I was talking to Lance, where's Lance? Lance is right there. You know, when we dreamt this thing up, I never thought it would ever get to this point where we'd have people that actually want to come see it, or that we'd had even thought about constructing something like this. But it's really, really great that you've all made time on your Saturday to come. I want to start off with a little bit of an agenda review of what the day is going to look like. So we're going to be up here. I'm going to make a few opening comments, some introductions, and then I'm going to have Joe Bassett, my partner from Dawn Equipment, on the manufacturing side of things, talk a little bit, and then really tickled to have Dr. Ricardo Salvador, one of my old college professors, and now with the Union of Concerned Scientists out in Washington, D.C. He flew out to be our keynote here. So we're going to have some messages to kind of get our minds in the right spot, and then we're going to head out to the plots. And there's some really, really exciting things, not only with the ClusterClucks that you're going to see moving autonomously today, but with some really forward-looking and thinking agronomic concepts. And so the ask I have for today is that you come with an open mind and you come with imagination. And when you look at these things, think about, you know, not necessarily what's wrong or why not, but could these things be possible and change the future of agriculture for the better. A couple housekeeping things before I go any further. So we have restrooms in the back. If you turn around and you see those, there's a lime green shed and a little galvanized shed. Those are the Stock Croppers, if you weren't here last year, all right? So we introduced those. Those are the handiwork of my mom and my dad. My dad always had the dream of having an outhouse near his shop, and I kind of thought he was nuts when he put it in, but when I'm over here working at the farm, it's a delight to do your business with looking up at the blue sky. So make use of them if you need. They've got running water in them and everything, so just like the Jetsons. If you look over in the corner there, the pretty gal with the sunglasses is my lovely wife, Mandy. She's got t-shirts for sale for $10. If you want to support our cause, take home a Stock Cropper t-shirt. We've got bottled water in the cattle tank there, trash, recyclables. What else am I forgetting here? Lunch. Oh, lunch. If you haven't put in your order and you want a burrito, they're going to pre-make those. So if you haven't done that, if you haven't put in your order for lunch, what we're going to do when we come back from the field, they're going to have them all ready to go, so we don't have to wait in line. So if you know, before you go out to the field, maybe stop and drop what you want to eat there. I think that is it for that. So now what I want to do is make some introductions of important people that have been here from the start, people that have been here the last 2 days helping, so that you have an idea who these folks are. If you want to if you can't get a hold of me and have a conversation, if I'm tied up, any of these individuals standing over here are a treasure trove, and most of them know more about this stuff than I do. And so feel free to latch on and have conversations with them. So first off, Joe Bassett, President and CEO of Dawn Equipment. He'll talk, I'll introduce him more later. Jason Mock from Muncie, Indiana, Constant Canopy Muncie Meats. Sheldon Stevemer, the co-founder of Stock Cropper. So the barn that you're going to go out and see on the winch today, Sheldon is the one that did all the engineer and design work. Standing next to him is the guy that actually had the first idea of putting a pen of livestock in the middle of a cornfield. That's Lance Peterson from Rush City, Minnesota. So those guys, it was our original core group that came up with this idea 20 months ago. And the highlight of my summer so far was when Dawn delivered us the ClusterCluck Nano, and I got to stand with those three guys and watch that thing dance for the first time on something that we had in a Twitter DM, 30 months ago, and now we've got it working in reality. It was a really, really great day. Next to Lance is Keaton Kruger. Keaton's from Ogden. He's been at every Cropper Field Day. He's been a ton of help. Good friend and confidant to me, a guy I like to bounce things off of. Works for Winfield United. And then Junior Fanstill from Nebraska. If you're interested in intercropping, Junior's done a ton of work in that stuff and put out some really valuable information on the importance of hybrid differences in this wide row spacing that you're going to see. So Junior is an excellent resource for that. Who else am I missing that isn't standing up front? Rick Bieber, you're not standing up front, but I want to recognize you because you've been an important part of this thing. So Rick, stand up so people know who you are. So Rick, I told Rick to interject when he sees fit. Rick's from out in South Dakota, and he's been every one of our field days and been a super supporter. He's just got a ton of wisdom around this soil health piece. So these are kind of my dream team of people that have helped me throughout the day and are going to be participating in various things. So if you want to have sidebars, they're great folks to talk to. Okay. So I was, every year I do this, I kind of struggle putting together my message on what I want to talk about, but I kept coming back to this theme of progress and what is progress in agriculture specifically. And if you go down to the Farm Progress Show here this week in Boone, you're going to see one version of progress, and that version is, big, wide, fast farm equipment that's designed to be able to do more with less people involved. And that's really the concept that Lance and Sheldon and I were stuck on 30 months ago when we were looking at this thing. Corn was $275, beans were $725. We're small farmers, don't have a lot of acres, and we were trying to figure out, is this worth staying in business, or what can we do to make progress here to put ourselves in a better spot? And so that process went on for about a month or two. Sheldon and I were exchanging a lot of ideas back and forth. He bounced it off of Lance, and Lance said, what about putting a pen of sheep in between corn? And then from there it coalesced into this concept. And I looked up a couple quotes about the term progress that I wanted to share and just kind of and go off on that a little bit here. So some quotes about progress. Without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. Progress is not inevitable, it's up to us to create it. Focus on progress, not perfection. So I think, these three quotes really sum up the journey that we've had from start to finish, or to start to this point where we're at right now. We knew when we sat down that first time, we knew that we had to make something completely different than what we were used to in the commodity agriculture system. If we wanted to have it to have value, to mean something to consumers, it had to have a very clear message. That's why it wasn't just a pen of sheep. We said, we need more biodiversity than that. We need a 3 or 4 ring animal circus on wheels. That was the comment we made, and that was the iteration from the beginning. We had to get far away from the norm to build value. And a lot of people have said to me, well, Zach, why are you screwing around with this? Don't you know that corn's $7.50 and beans are almost $15? Why in the hell would you waste your money on this? Because we're saved now, right? Well, anybody who's in this business, I sold the last of my corn this week for $7.50, but I also did my cash flow for 2023, and I've seen what's happened. And it's the same thing that's happened 3 other times in my career, where we get a pop, and then the machine responds, and the pop becomes not very fun anymore, and it usually has a long tail. And this is the third wave of that now. And so when I think about what we've done here and the concepts that we have out here, they could be very, very useful as we move ahead into whatever is going to be next. They may not be next year, the year after that, but that pattern always changes, or always comes, where we seem to drain the tank and be back to a break-even proposition, and that's what we were trying to solve and get away from. The next quote, progress is, not inevitable. It's up to us to create it. You're not going to see John Deere out here coming out with a ClusterCluck barn. You're not going to see Corteva or Bayer supporting something like this. And I come from that world. A lot of you know that I was a Pioneer seed rep and chemical dealer and granular dealer, and I came from that space. But we knew that it was going to take individuals to step up. And none of us really have to be doing this, the ones that are invested. Joe Bassett doesn't need to make ClusterClucks. He makes great strip till bars and planter equipment. He's got a great business without this. But Joe is passionate, and you're going to hear that passion in a few minutes about this space. A guy like Jason Mock, Jason comes from a family farm, about 3,000 acres out in just north of Indianapolis. Jason, could you just sit back and farm rather than trying to invent a vertically integrated meat system and buy a slaughterhouse? And he doesn't have to. He's passionate about it. He believes, and that's the thing with the people that have come into this project. They're all passionate and have that drive, and they're willing to be creators. And I really, really value that spirit in this whole thing. The last quote here is focus on progress, not perfection. Nothing that you are going to see out here today is perfect. I can point at flaws even in the new barn here right off the bat, let alone the Max 9, and in fact it weighs 10,000 pounds and you can't hardly pull it with a front assist tractor. Or the schematics that we have out here. We're bootstrapping this by ourselves. We don't have a $250,000 plot, budget for equipment. We're kind of making do with what we can. But the fun thing is that, Joe and I were talking about this last night. The perfection part really doesn't matter when you get into these schematics and you see what our plants are capable from when you get out of the way. And so, and sometimes I would say even the imperfections have led to some of our biggest innovations on design. Absolutely. We've had all sorts of screw-ups, especially in the last 2 weeks trying to get ready for this. And I'm just tickled today because I feel like we've come so far and progressed so far in the last 30 months. So, what we're going to see here today at the Stock Cropper plot, we're going to see barns and we're going to see concepts that are basically just around a simple premise, is that if we change the arrangement rather than just a field of corn or just a field of soybeans, what might be possible when you get the synergies of having plants, different species of plants and different species of animals working together in these different formations and being able to stack entities. And it's really the stacking of entities where the value comes, where you can get ahead. It really doesn't work to have a stock cropper with just some pigs in it, okay, with what this costs right now. But if you can have 2 or 3 or 4 things that you can stack up, get the value of that manure, it really starts to make sense fast. The best thing that you're going to see here today is that we have nothing for sale here today other than t-shirts for 10 bucks. Okay? All of these concepts are free. Monsanto or Bayer doesn't own them, Corteva doesn't own them. John Deere does not have an unlocked fee yet on the Sun. They may try soon. But these are very, very simple principles that cost absolutely nothing. You just have to change the arrangement and let the things that we're going to show you today happen. And that's the fun part for me when I look forward to the challenges, especially for smaller farmers that may get squeezed on the next way out. The goal here is to really create a system and an environment where those people can continue on. So, as far as the plot here, I want to talk about kind of what the goals were for the season with the Stock Cropper project. The thing that I wanted to achieve, so last year we had the ClusterCluck Nano, if you've seen that online, that Don developed for us, and the goal there was to get an autonomous barn last year. We were autonomous up to the point of everything but steering is where we got. So we could program a move with our phone, and it would move on a schedule 8 feet with the solar powered movement. The goal for this year is I wanted to have autonomous guidance in a couple different forms. So both GPS satellite based as well as winched movement. And there's a couple reasons for that. A lot of people have said to me, well, that sounds really expensive and costs a lot. If you want this idea to scale, if you're going to have 30 or 40 barns out here on this field, believe me, after doing this for 3 years, you don't want to have to be here 3 times a day moving them. It sucks on weekends. And Juice is not here today. For those of you who know my guy Jordan Newton, he had a shooting event at state 4-H with his daughter. But Juice has been great at being the guy. But I tell you what, when he went on vacation and I had to make the 17-mile drive over here 3 times a day, I wanted this autonomous stuff to work, really, really bad. Or if you're not going to be farming, say you're going to have a ClusterCluck you have a farm acreage, right? And you want to grow some sheep and some chickens and have it, instead of burning $4 gas, you grow protein with it, right? And so if you want to still go to the lake on the weekend and enjoy things, you want to have a machine that can move itself across safely and confidently, and not have to be there and have the feed and water capacity on, so that you can still live your life. A lot of people aren't accustomed to the farming lifestyle that want to get into the farming lifestyle, and so we want to design this so that it works in that functionality. So the other goal with what we wanted to do out here is I wanted just to put more of these cropping schematics. None of these are original ideas for me. There's all sorts of people across the country. I want to recognize Bob Recker in the front here in blue. Put your hand up, Bob. So Sheldon and I went to a Bob Recker clinic, I think it was 10 years ago, around this 60-inch corn. And I remember coming back, and that was when we first had the idea for the twin row stuff that you're going to see, was 10 years ago. This is the first time we put it out in a plot setting like this. But we wanted to put these other examples and have some of these experts that have been doing it more than I have. And if any of you up here have been doing it and you want to share your comments more out there, feel free to chip in. But I wanted to have things, if people weren't interested in the barns, what are some other concepts? That's one of the things Sheldon said when we worked on this thing originally. He's like, stock cropping may not take off but some of the concepts might impact agriculture for the better for the future. And so I wanted to, the rest of the plot is kind of dedicated to what might be applicable easier to broad scale agriculture. So that's really the thought process of what we set up here. The other big thing we wanted to do is deliver our first sales of barns. And so Jason Mock over here, he has been an incredible supporter of this project. If you don't follow him on Facebook or social media, you really should. He's got a tremendous project. He's working out in Indiana. He's about 45 miles north of Indianapolis. He's got a regenerative ag farm. And the stock croppers, he's been waiting patiently all summer because he's got everything ready to go. And he's going to take the ClusterCluck Nano 2 home with him here this afternoon and get that working out at this regenerative farm. That's going to be a demonstration place to bring, people on vacation, school trips, all sorts of different venues to try to get the community out to see what is possible when you think a little bit differently outside the lines. So we're going to get this barn out to them, and then the second barn next week, I believe. So lastly, my comments here, what is the direction of what we're doing going forward? We've come a hell of a long way in 30 months. The fact that we've got 4 barns here today and 3 of them are walking on their own. One of which was just got going here yesterday, which was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to showing you that. But we need to do more refinement on the guidance and the propulsion and the steering to get that really honed in. The guidance thing is a really tough problem to solve. We've taken a really, really good first crack at it. It's been working awesome out here in the field. You're going to get to watch this new one here in a little bit as well. But there's just a lot of things that we have to take into account, and can we incorporate camera systems, other pieces of sensory stuff to build in safety. So that's really going to be a major thing in the design. We also, Joe and I were talking last night, we already have a list of things that we want to change on this version now that we see it out in the field. As far as lightening it up, it's a really delicate balance of having it light enough so it takes very little power and driving the cost down, but strong enough that the pigs aren't going to tear it apart or whatever you want to have in it. So we're getting closer. So the barn over here, we dropped 2,000 pounds from the barn that was brand new last year that we cut in weight, and it's basically the same footprint, same holding capacity. The next thing, the next big step for us really is to, we feel, I think Joe and I specifically feel like we're kind of nearing the end of our own personal runway as far as what we're able to do in the next step, and so we will likely be looking to the investment community to get an injection of capital so that we've got some really big steps that need to take place in order to move this thing ahead. And we've got some of those folks here today. And speaking of that, I forgot to mention this. Spencer, where are you at? Spencer Stensrud, stand up. I gotta say this. This is Spencer Stensrud. He's from Ag Ventures Alliance, okay? And he, along with Winworth Betco, I gotta give them a shout out too. They agreed to sponsor everything for our lunch today, so lunch is at no cost. So could we give Ag Ventures Alliance a round of applause? So Ag Ventures Alliance is a great farmer-based investment group. Is that the right way of saying it, Spencer? And they invest in ag startups all over the country. And Spencer is infamous in a good way in the ag investment community for sure. So I want to thank and recognize him. And then also he wanted me to give a plug for the Ag Ventures Alliance Field Day, where they're going to have a bunch of innovative stuff at NIAC on September 7th. Correct? All right, I got that plug in. Okay, so that's kind of the path forward, and we're going to keep doing things like this, and if you have ideas today that we want to incorporate into next year, this is kind of, I do this for folks like you, and for people that aren't here maybe today, but are interested in this concept of farming weird, and like I said, when we head out to the plots here, I just ask that you be creative and imaginative, and let's see what we can figure out, because maybe you have the next great idea that we haven't thought of yet. So let's be open and share when we go out. So that's all that I have for comments here. What I want to do next is introduce Mr. Joseph Bassett. So Joe, if you want to start working. So Joe came to me via Jason Mock about a year and a half ago. Is that right? January of 20? Yeah, or 21. And Joe is president and CEO of Dawn Equipment Company based out of Sycamore, Illinois, and now Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Milwaukee is where we're making the ClusterClucks right now. So I asked Joe to come up, and I set him up in the intro part, why why would a mid-manufacturer, mid-ag manufacturer want to screw around with a regenerative ag system of moving livestock through a field? And I'll let you further introduce yourself or take it from there.
Thanks, Zach. I just want to start by saying how year over year, it's amazing how much change we've made in terms of the technical progress with Stock Cropper, and I'm just really pleased with that. But, so I've recently sort of decided to completely recalibrate my career, and I don't know if it's a midlife crisis or whatnot, but when I was 21, I studied at the University of Iowa, and I studied. One of my best friends in the physics department was this Japanese guy, and we were driving around in the Amana colonies, and he drove off the road, and I smashed my face into the windshield of this Honda Civic, and it actually had destroyed part of my nasal cavity. And I finally just, a few weeks ago decided I was going to start fixing all these sort of things about my life and changing my life, and I got that fixed so I can breathe through my left nose, and it's so transformative. And I've also decided, okay, so first I have to work on the basics and be able to breathe freely, and then I'm going to start looking at my career. And for the first 20 years of my career was basically spent making farm equipment more complex, right? That our general sort of theory in agriculture engineering is that we're going to add automation to farming, add efficiency, make it more digital, make it more data centered, so on and so forth, right? And so that's how I've essentially spent the past decade of my career is making planters specifically more automated and more complex, right? And so I to a certain degree, I don't think we've really done much to improve outcomes for our customers by doing this. And I don't know that technology is necessarily serving farmers, right? And that the idea of engineering and technology is that we serve our customers. So if we serve our customers well, we're improving their lives and improving their outcomes, or making them more money, or so on and so forth. And I just honestly believe moving forward, it's arguable whether automation and robotics is going to do that for farmers. And I don't believe necessarily that the superposition of robotics and automation over farming is going to result in either the lives or the communities or the businesses that you all want. But you're going to get it whether you want it or not. Okay? So because you always have to sell something more. So I started thinking like, well, all right, how could we just, how could we start to farm in a vastly more efficient way, right? How could we farm in a way that makes agriculture vastly more profitable? So more, environmentally sustainable, which is just simply not a trend which is not going to erase itself from our society, and is in fact going to escalate more and more. Agriculture has just a profound impact on the climate and the water and the soil and so on and so forth. And last night when we were sitting around having beers, and I'd never thought of it before, and I was, I sell a lot of products in Ukraine, and I have this deep emotional connection to the war, and you look at how energy policy and food policy has been impacted by the conflict in Ukraine, and you look at gas prices in Europe and so on and so forth, and I was thinking about petroleum, and I was like, but what is petroleum and what is oil? It's like this dense. What is coal? It's dense, black, organic stuff that we're taking out of the earth, and that we're this black organic resource out of the soil, and you're making something with it, and you're using that to power something or to grow something, or so on and so forth. And that we have to think of the soil as this resource, energy-rich resource in the same way. But I digress. So, okay, so here's my game plan for the second phase in my career. I want to make increasingly simple devices. See, I actually think it's becoming, agricultural technology and engineering has, in a sense, become very easy. Like, it's almost thoughtless to just add more automation or computing or control systems to farm equipment, right? You take something that you used to make a decision about as an operator, and then you try and automate it. Or you take something that you used to pull a lever to adjust, and you automate it. And you just keep doing that more and more and more and more, to the point where, okay, we have these increasingly robotic systems where it just takes human involvement out of it. And that's actually simple. Like, everybody knows what to do. It's a simple strategy. So I love contrarian viewpoints, and I think that great investments, in most cases, happen when you are doing something which is contrarian. Okay? So I look at, what does everyone believe the future of farming is going to be like? So, and then what is something that's vastly different than what the conventional wisdom of what the future is going to look like? And then how do I do that? Well, what that might be is choosing simplicity. Okay, so what would simplicity look like? Stopped and had breakfast this morning in Britt, and on the way back up here, passed by the local co-op, and they've got big tanks of ammonia sitting out there. And the one thing I can guarantee you is that you will not be applying anhydrous ammonia in 10 years. I will bet anyone in this audience $100 if you're still applying ammonia in 10 years. Where I live in northern Illinois, the local co-op has just, and this is DeKalb County, Illinois, they've just decided to stop selling anhydrous ammonia this season. This will be the last season, right? Okay, that's change, but that's like a glacial part of change. But fertilizer is going to be a huge problem, okay? And so how would you imagine farming in a way which requires no synthetic fertilizer? Like, I'm interested in like a big question, like how do we take fertilizer and look at the Ukraine-Russia conflict again? So much of the products that you're applying are mined in Belarus, are mined in Russia. That being dependent on granular fertilizer products that are mined in Belarus actually is a national security issue for us that we have to solve. Okay, so how do we use dramatically less of it? Well, it's easy to use a lot less. We can do like nothing and use less. You can strip till and use a little bit less, and you can start to apply it more precisely and everything like that, and you can start using more and more and more. Okay, well, the conventional wisdom of farming will get you to using less and less and less, but the conventional wisdom of farming will not get you to using zero. So, I have essentially zero agronomic knowledge. I actually, I studied physics and I design mechanical things, and I just have a general principle of where we're going, right? But the one thing I know is that animals probably are going to be part of the equation, right? I had this theory that dates back like 10 years when you started to see more and more regulatory pressure around water quality, specifically in the eastern seaboard of the country, and that you saw the kind of rapid adoption of cover crops and no-till in some of those areas around that time. And my theory was that that was going to produce a sort of rapid, broad, sweeping movement. Then you saw the Des Moines Waterworks lawsuit, and you thought, okay, well, this is just indicative of a sort of broader change that's going to happen, and you're going to see increased regulatory pressure around conservation practices and water quality, and and so on and so forth. And what I thought would happen in 5 years is probably going to end up taking 20 years, and that's disappointing because my career is only so long, and I just don't have that much time, and I'm feeling increasingly impatient by how slowly change happens in agriculture. But that's my personal problem, and that I have to do whatever I can to try and advance the pace of progress. But so we started getting really into cover crops, right? And we went from like making these roller crimper systems where you do these soybean cereal rye cover crop programs, and they pretty much work. And you know what? Every acre of soybeans around here, really, you could be growing in a cereal rye cover crop system with a pretty heavy cover crop pretty predictable result, and have used less herbicide, and it would be easy. Okay, so we went from that, and we're like, hey, things are going well with the roller crimping system and so on and so forth. Let's start pushing into more systems where you're not necessarily killing the cover crop, or trying to grow corn, using legumes or other cover crop mixes to produce the nitrogen that you need in order to grow a corn crop. How would you ask yourself the question, how would you grow the highest margin or profit per acre crop? That's like the thought experiment. So how would I make the most amount of money? Well, I have to grow the highest yield, and then it's like a differential equation with the input cost and so on and so forth. And so there will be a sweet spot where you could dramatically cut out input costs and take a bit of a yield hit, but like we could actually win on profit by using vastly less. And so that was the theory. Okay, so the systems in which the living mulch cover crop systems have not only not worked, they have profoundly not worked. And so I went from that to saying, okay, well, what's the missing part of this equation? The missing part of this equation is animal byproducts, obviously, right? Gotta be. So that's basically where we're at today. So, we say, okay, soybean programs, we can do a very close to an organic no-till soybean system. That's possible, right? Where you're doing no tillage and applying no chemicals. That's within striking distance for us. But corn is so much harder, and so I just feel like the next stage is going to be this wide row corn with the rotational grazing into it. I do have a plan also to make a sort of I have a patent for a multi-robot system that moves electric fences for like cattle, where you'll have like 3 or more robots that sort of autonomously move cattle over a field throughout a predefined shape. I do think that we'll make that too, and we're just gonna see where it goes, because I don't really know. This is not a well-trodden path, and it's just kind of a quantum change in the way farms would look, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I think if we just point ourselves in the right direction and keep going for long enough, we're going to figure out how to make it work. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Joe. You see why I like working with this guy? He thinks a little bit different from the rest. So, next up, I want to introduce our last speaker. It's just a real true treat. So Ricardo Salvador, Dr. Ricardo Salvador, I should say, was my crop physiology 230 professor at Iowa State, and I loved his class. It was tough, but I learned everything I know about crop production. I think probably 90% of it from taking that class. And the principles I learned in that class are in all of what we are doing out here. And this is the guy that, what did we figure? We hadn't seen each other in 22 years till yesterday when you showed up. So, but he has been a tremendous supporter. I reached out to him when we came up with this crazy idea because I knew he was out in Washington, D.C., and I wanted him to see and get his feedback on it. And he has been a tremendous supporter that has hooked us up with all sorts of different avenues. So if you were here last year, do you remember the film crew that was here, that was taking footage of us? Well, Ricardo was the one that put us in contact, I think, with Michael Pollan, who then got in contact with the Food Inc. people. And I have some fun updates to share probably at the end of the day about that I'll save. But anyway, Ricardo, I enjoy following and reading his writings on Twitter. He wrote a fantastic op-ed for the Storm Lake Times that got picked up by Civil Elites, syndicated across the country a year and a half ago when we started the project. And I just couldn't be more tickled to have somebody of his status and level out from Washington, D.C. to come. And I wanted him to just give his reaction to somebody that was still is an agronomist, but a professor now in the policy space out there, of his thoughts about this system and why he's excited about it. So, Ricardo, let's give him a welcome, a hand there, get him on here.
I appreciate that very generous introduction from Zach, and particularly, I don't know if you noticed that he said that he appreciated the class that he took. That's not a comment I often got about that particular class. But I have to tell you that I am paying the price of having to bore you folks for about 10 to 15 minutes because I need an excuse to get out here and see this for myself and to meet some of the real careful thinkers, basically the crew standing over here that put together this system. Because all I have to say to you is that what Zach and Joe have told you that they're intending to do, I'm seeing them actually accomplish, actually realize. On my way out here, I stopped by Iowa State to see some former colleagues, and in one way or another, they all asked a version of the same question, what brings you out here? And when I mentioned I'm coming to a field day in Buffalo Center, then the follow-up question was, well, what in the world is happening in Buffalo Center? And then I would describe the system. And while you can describe what's happening here in terms of the mechanics, in terms of the logistics, the innovation, the trials that Zach and Joe have been describing to you, what I see happening out here is essentially building hope for what might be possible in the future. And that's one of the things that brings me out here. It's one of the things that explains why I've been tracking very carefully what these folks have been doing. So let me unpack that for you just a little bit. When Zach described to me over the last couple of weeks what he hoped for at this event, one of the things that he made clear is that he didn't want this to be a typical field day. In other words, he said, the folks that are here because they already know that the current system is not working. We don't need to persuade folks about that, and we don't need to start out with downers. We need to start talking about what we're going to do to make things better. And when I conclude, if I remember, I want to summarize that theme around what colleagues are doing. But let me remind you that the USDA keeps track web app that you can look up if you're interested in seeing the details that is titled the U.S. Food Dollar. Since 1993, they've tracked by various different sectors around the value chain where we are paying individual contributors to that value chain and how much. And so this is the source of the data that you've seen throughout the years that records how much of the food dollar ends up in the hands of farmers. The current figure, they keep this up to date, the current figure is 16%. So that means that the majority of the food dollar goes into the sector that the USDA calls marketing. Now, I'm familiar with the way that usually is received or interpreted, and particularly when you're speaking with farm audiences. A typical reaction will often be, well, it's just a shame. Somebody's getting away with something here because without what the farmer does, then nothing else would follow, and yet the majority of the financial rewards are going to people that are upstream in the production chain, in the value chain. But actually, if you step back and take yourself out of that, nobody is getting away with anything, at least not in a major way. You know, everybody's got their angles. But in the big picture, when you look at the fields that are surrounding this area, you know, the vast expanses of what appear to be highly efficient agricultural systems outputting commodity grain, soy, corn. Think about all of the operations that are required so that that actually is actually useful to someone. And think about the folks in the industries that are actually invested in the infrastructure, the transportation, the energy, the packaging, all of the logistics that are required in order to transform what you see in those fields either into a pork chop on somebody's plate or a bowl of Rice Krispies or a bowl of cornflakes out there. So nobody's getting away with anything. The value add actually explains how you can take what is essentially coal to diamonds out here in these fields, turn that raw commodity into food. That's what the value of the food system is providing once this stuff leaves here. So, in essence, what that food system is doing is saving people time and giving them convenience. But you all know all of this, you know, I'm just referring to Zach's reminder here. I am just starting there to make sure that everybody understands when then I make this claim. What I see Zack and his colleagues doing are figuring out how they as farmers can retain more of the food dollar because they're providing more of the value to turn this stuff into what people recognize as useful for them. In this case, they're not thinking about the grain as the end product. Using the language of economists, they're thinking of almost everything that you see out here as an intermediate product that's going to be used on the farm. And the final product is the high-value meat that they're selling off of the farm. And so this is their effort to deal with the phenomenon that has actually created those negative conditions. And Zack warned me, everybody here is an expert about, nobody here needs to be told. Namely, for instance, one of the supposed deficiencies of the last 50 years is that we've displaced thousands of farm families. You typically don't hear that cited as one of the accomplishments of the current system, but it's undeniable that that's been one of the outcomes of the supposed knowledge, education, and technology for the last 50 and 60 years. We have displaced farm families. So this is their resistance to that. How can we stay on the land by providing value, utilizing what we have, the land, the entrepreneurship, the creative thinking? So that's what I mean when I say that what I see out here gives me hope. That's the briefest way that I can describe what brings anybody out to Buffalo Center to see. Now, let me expand just a little bit more on a couple of the things that I see that are being done here. And Zack asked me to speak both to the agronomics of the system as well as how this might show up in the policy space later in a Farm Bill year. It's a very relevant question to ask. I shared with the group that was here last night an opinion that might seem like it's a little bit of an extreme opinion, but I'm giving you this opinion from an agronomic perspective. If you had to think of one of the most wasteful ways that you can utilize the resources around us, and just deliberately try to make that system as dumb as possible, please no one take offense here, you would come up with these large monocrop systems that we have over here where you basically are trying to intervene as minimally as possible. Get your fertilizer in the fall, get your spring operations in, mostly leave it by itself, come back and harvest it, which is what the system has been reduced to in the ideal. And in the end, be producing a very low value commodity that makes it so the majority of farmers need off-farm income in order to be able to survive. Think about, if you had to come up with a system, whether that's the thing that you would design. So without slipping into the downer message that Zack said, don't go there, let's talk about the future, then think about the opposite of that. On a system like this, think about the efficiencies that this team is putting together. You first of all have the nutrient cycling efficiency, which, as Joe just reminded us, is all about replacing the dependence on external input, particularly an expensive input, and particularly an input that has consequences unless you are really a consummate manager of these inputs. And it's primarily nitrogen, which is the most fluid of those. So these folks, through cycling the nutrients, utilizing biology, an understanding of what they're doing, what the crops are contributing and what the different species of livestock are contributing, are actually taking a hold of an efficiency that the majority of the systems out here just ignore, don't even attempt to use. Or as Wendell Berry has said, when you broke the integration of crops and livestock, you took a neat solution and broke it down into two distinct problems. So what Zack is doing here is reversing that, going back and integrating the cycling of nutrients. That's one efficiency. The other efficiency is that they understand that even though you don't crop the whole year long, the system out here is highly fungible. You can get lots of different bursts of growth of different types, according to different jobs, according to your management, beginning in the fall, through the winter, into the spring, through the summer, and again into the fall. But that means that you're here monitoring and intervening. Specifically, I'm referring to the strips that they're utilizing and to the different mix of the forage species in there and what the individual livestock species are doing in preparing different mixes at different times of the year. There's an efficiency that's involved there. So it isn't just a monocrop system. You have lots of different species. It's biology that can have. Another efficiency is the utilization of volume. You typically think in the agricultural space of the area. This is an 18th century idea. It dates back to the time when the only way we could produce more was to extend the land. Now that is decidedly not the case. We continue to behave that way by thinking just in terms of area. And we need to think in terms of volume, which is what you see happening here. Specifically, the strips that you see here, among the many things that they are doing, are allowing Zack and his colleagues to take advantage of the phenomenon of overyielding. As Joe and Zack have reminded you here, the main thing that's driving the productivity of this system and that we're trying to capture is the intersection of solar radiation. So why do you want to set up a solid set of a canopy that absorbs most of that solar radiation in the top 2 feet, and then the rest of it is shaded out, does no more work throughout the entire canopy? Whereas here you see that you're creating edges where you can illuminate as much of the canopy as possible and utilize the spaces in between those edges in a very certain way. Think about those efficiencies as opposed to the efficiencies displacing far canopy, because you actually just believe the way that the system was handed to me by the generations that came before me is the only alternative that there is. I see these folks refusing to accept that and to say, if we want different outcomes of the system, then we need to think about the ways that we're going to achieve those different outcomes, not just think that we're going to kill before, but that we're somehow going to outsmart, figure out something that no one has figured out before about continuous corn and soy, and then suddenly we're going to make it. So they're radically thinking about how to transform the system within the constraints of the ecology and the biology that's at hand here, and within the constraints of what they can produce that's actually sellable, something that they can market in this area. So to me, those are all the kinds of efficiencies that you want to promote. Back in the late 90s, which was the era when we began to get a glimmer of what the biotech future was going to look like, I remember very distinctly being highly educated in just one sentence by a farmer from Northeast Iowa at a conference at Iowa State, where we were hearing about all of the glories that were going to come from the adoption of herbicide-resistant crops. And clearly, this fellow was thinking ahead. He was sitting next to me, and he sort of murmured. I thought he was going to be grousing, but he said one of the smartest things I've ever heard. He basically said to me, you know, we used to make our living by leveraging somebody else's money. And now if this system takes over, we're going to make our living by leveraging somebody else's intelligence. And I knew exactly what he meant, because the picture, remember this is the late 1990s, the picture that had been drawn for us was a vision of progress that meant what you needed to do on a farm was to be smart enough to figure out the package of the seed that went with the right chemicals, and somebody else created those. You basically just had to choose. Your choice was what hybrid, what chemicals. And so you've seen that scenario play out. And if you think about it just a little bit, when you purchase those seeds, when you purchase those chemicals, your sale is done. If the season goes bad on you, if a 20-second hail takes out your crop, there's no such thing as going back and saying, I need my money back because, I didn't make the crop. But the people who sell you those seeds and the people that sell you the herbicides and the chemicals, they've made their money. So what you're doing is you're taking on the risk. You're doing the outdoor part. And the rest of us, all of us together, make sure that if things do go south on you, you actually double down on the system. We make you whole. These days, through a crop insurance program, so that you can stay on the land and take that same risk again next year. And so, again, the system that we're seeing here is fighting back on that. It's saying, we have the intelligence. We're not going to be depending on the intelligence of someone else. We pick and choose from more than just the tools that the industry will provide to us. One last thing I want to mention to you, which I think is really admirable about what is going on here. I need to be really careful how I phrase it. I live in the world of advocacy, and it's advocacy on behalf of a more sustainable agricultural system. All of the parts working together in such a way that what they produce is a system that is more sustainable by default, not just changing one component, one part here and there. Which, by the way, is the standard engineering definition of a system. Components that work together to produce a specified end. Well, what I see in the system that we're going to be taking a look at here in just a few minutes is a system that's very different from many of the systems that folks with really good intentions, some of my very best friends, allies, and colleagues, are implementing and demonstrating in different parts of the country when talking about sustainable practices. And this is what I mean when I say I have to be careful with the things that I say this, but it is the truth. Many of us who are working in that space don't have the background that you folks have. We don't come from an agricultural background. I do. I'm one generation away, but I'm not going to claim that expertise because one generation away people were farming on both sides of the family. And so a lot of us that are working in this space trying to create the alternative to the system around Zack's farm do not have the technical confidence. It doesn't mean that our hearts are not in the right place and that we don't mean well or that our ideas are not good. It means that our ability to take good ideas and turn them into something that is genuinely better, something that you can actually show people and have them conclude, I see that this is working and that it's better and that I can try it out. Instead, what I see when I go around to all my friends and see the trials that they're doing, they're little plots, the growth is scraggly, you know, you ask them technical questions and they don't really know. You know, in the worst cases, remember, these are my friends, in the worst cases, you know, they'll talk to me about astrological ideas and so on. And one of the things that I see, and I told Zack last night for the very first time this, is that what makes the system different, Zack told you this at the beginning, and I told you I can only repeat what Zack and Joe have already told you. He knows this world. He grew up surrounded and in the industrial ag world. He sold the seeds. He sold the chemicals. He talked to the farmers, attempted to support what they were doing as much as possible. He's got the technical competence. So here you have an innovation that's backed up not only because of the fact that it is a new idea, explicitly trying to resist the notion that farmers have no value, they're just here to take on the risk, and doing it with technical competence. And so for all of these reasons, what I see happening here gives me hope. We're a relatively small number of people. There's an online following that Zack and Joe and all of the folks that you see over here are generating. If you think about the amount of time that it took to shift agricultural practices and systems in our past, summarizing very quickly, I see shifts happening in about a 30-year period. And they tend to start out very small, and they tend to start out by being ridiculed by the folks that are invested in the way that they're doing right now. But because, as you've heard, and you probably are persuaded, this is why you really care about the Buffalo Center, this is the beginning of a really big idea that really does answer the things that are wrong with the present system, so it's got as good a chance as anything that I know to blossom and become the future of agriculture. And I promise you that if I didn't forget, I just wanted to restate something that Zack is all about, Zack and his colleagues here. You know, if you follow them on social media, one of their themes, which I just get invigorated by every time I hear, is get busy living. And so let me just add to that a little bit in terms of what that means to me. Get busy creating the future that you want. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Ricardo. So, on to the fun part. We get to go out and actually see this stuff. We're not just talking about it. We've got innovations in the field to show you. So what we're going to do here in the next hour is we're going to split the group into half, okay? And I'm going to ask that it's really tempting when you're at field days to like lag behind and have sidebar conversations, but with the wind, it's going to be really hard to hear. So if we can stay tight with the groups, and try to avoid the sidebar stuff till we get to lunch, just out of respect for everybody here, because it's going to be difficult with the wind. But we're going to split the groups in two. Let's take the 1, 2, 3, the first 3.5 rows of hay bales, or straw bales, I should say, toward the south here. If you guys want to get up, and you are going to follow Mr. Jason Mock, and we're going to have basically 2 sessions here, and we'll swap. So we're going to have the corn and soybean, what we call the succotash mix, a 60 and 90 inch corn, as well as the Indian corn and sweet corn intermixed with cucurbit pumpkins. So that's going to be the first stop. We're going to aim for about 15 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on how conversation goes, and then we'll switch. And then the group in the back is going to follow me, along with several others, over to the twin row 60 and 90 and 30 inch comparisons. And so we'll spend time there, then we'll swap groups, and then we will end up together around the ClusterCluck barns to finish the day out, and then back up here in the yard to see the debut of the ClusterCluck Nano 2. So that's the plan. If you need water, we've got a bunch of water over here if you want to take it out with you. But if we could move somewhat expeditiously to stay on track with the taco truck, that would be fantastic. They're a couple minutes ahead of us. I don't have any of this reverse what we did here. So this is what I call the 60 inch, 90 inch twin row versus 30 inch comparison. So it's a real simple idea that started back. Is Bob Recker in this group, or is he in the other one? Yeah, so I've made reference to Bob in this 60 inch corn thing. About a decade ago, he was playing around with that. Sheldon here in the front, and I went to that and came home with this idea of what about a 60 inch twin row. And we played around with it in 13 and 14, I think it was, but we didn't really ever do it quite right, like what we've done here to give it a true test, I think. And so, but it's a system, this idea of skipping rows instead of just doing the 30 inch standard and then doing something interesting to get more contribution margin in between is the concept that we were trying to eke out here. So the setup for this, this was a bugger to plan to put in. Like I said, we don't have everything the latest greatest. I don't have a twin row planter. So what I did was we made three passes with my 40-foot Kinsey planter, and I wanted to have a couple different variables. I wanted to have multiple hybrids because Junior here, and the work that he's done down in Nebraska, he's found that hybrid selection when you're doing this wide row cropping makes a huge difference. So you want to just say a few little things about that, what you kind of found in the variance for how important hybrid selection is.
So my stuff wasn't in 60s, but from what I saw was I did a big strip intercrop. I did 8 rows of corn, 8 rows of soybeans, and I tried. The first year I did it, I noticed there's got to be characteristics that hybrids will show differently. So the next year I did a big plot. I tried, I think, 11 or 12 different hybrids at different populations throughout the plot. And then towards harvest, I took each individual row to yield and put them on a spreadsheet and put all the numbers together. And we had, out of 111 samples, I think, we had at least four samples that were over 420 bushels an acre on dry land. And this is
In Nebraska.
in Nebraska, on the outside row. Not in Iowa.
Did you say 420 on the outside row?
Yes, those 4 samples ended up being on the outside row.
So when you selected your hybrids, was there any look at the criteria, like flex or semi-determined? Did you keep track of that?
So my criteria for the plot was they needed to be newer numbers in case they decided, okay, it worked for me, but all of a sudden they're going to discontinue. So they needed to be newer so I could continue with it. Second, from the first year, I saw that there was potential to grab a little more wind, so they had to have a good green snap rate. And then just other general characteristics for my soil type of guy. No, because what I noticed was, so I tried each number at 2 different So I wanted to see if at my low population on that outside row, can I maintain that double layer? Can I keep it to harvest? Or do I have to plant that hybrid thicker? And so there's no yes or no, a flex or a fixed year. It all depended on how it came out at the end of the year. And I'd say that it's a toss-up. There's no right or wrong. So
Yeah, so it sounds very familiar to what we did here. So we've got on one planter pass on the 60-inch stuff, we have 4 different hybrids. So every pair of twin rows is a hybrid. Then we switched to the 90s, and then across the 40-foot planter, we'd only have room for 3 hybrids there. So we have 3 different Pioneer hybrids. I'm staying true to my team from the past in the 90-inch formation. And then we have the same 4 hybrids in the same order as on the 60-inch corn down in the conventional 30-inch stuff. So on top of those variables, we have 3 different population blocks. So it sounds very familiar. So I stole the idea from Junior. Exactly. We basically took what he did and we replicated it here in the twin row setup. So we had the first planting block. I had the planter set for 16,000. The second planting block for 250 feet, 25,000, and then the last one at 36,000 pop with the planter set. So if you're trying to think, what does that actually average out to across the 60-inch row? The fact that it's essentially the population that it was. So the first block in the 60s were at about 16,000. In the 90s, we're at about, I think it was like 10 or 11,000 when I did the math, double check myself this morning, and then it just proportionally goes up. So if you haven't seen what we talked about, the edge effect and why we put these gaps in, you can see the flex right here. Look at this plant out here. When this thing has full sunlight, you know, most cornfields in Iowa only put on 1 ear. This bugger has got 1, 2, and almost 3. There's about 2.5 actually on that one. So it has the ability to flex. Jason Mock had a plant a couple years ago. He trained his son to take a leek on, put 31 ears on it. He went out and pissed on it every day, and it was 1197 Pioneer. Somebody made a joke about that earlier. 31 ears. So the plants have a code. They know how to reproduce, and so what this edge effect and taking advantage of opening up the canopy so you have sunlight going all the way down to the bottom is where this ability comes to really kind of milk that curve and see, you know, can we get close to parity yields with just changing the arrangement and then add value in between, okay? So you see these different forage mixes that we have in between. So what could we do with this type of stuff if we have these gaps? So there's a lot of differences in the height. Some of it comes from the seeding date, but I'll start with this one in the back here. So, or right behind me. So this is the same forage mix you're going to see up by the stock cropper. I seeded this the week of the 4th of July and we caught a rain right away. And now we're looking at stuff that's almost head high coming through here. If you walk through and look at it, it's not having any impact on the corn because we're past our competitive weed-free period when we established it. And so when you go through and you look and start doing the ear counts and you're doing the math on the fact that when we look at some of these some of the ear counts that we were getting out of this stuff, and we've got well over 400 bushel corn in these twin row lines. I think we did, I'm gonna get confused with the stop over there. But I guess what the point I'm trying to make is there's a ton of opportunity. If you get close to parity and then have something like, say if you had cattle over here with this forage mix, you turn that loose. I'm not a cattle guy, but what did you estimate when we were out here talking last night on how long, if this stuff still goes, you know, in cattle country, what you could do with something like this if you had fence?
I had
Nice and loud, so
51 head on 13 acres, and that lasted, it was maybe 6 inches taller than this, and it lasted 2 weeks during the growing season.
Yeah. But what did you say about the winter?
So after you combine,
Yeah.
depending on how many head you had, but if you were able to set up a fencing system, you could keep livestock out here all year long.
So the idea of getting a parity yield on a corn crop and then having the forage value of being able to graze that. And that's what we're talking about, stacking enterprises and entities in the same space, just arranging things a little bit differently. This is another concept here. I call this the nitrogen builder mix, okay? this is one of my favorites, and it was the first real thing that Sheldon and I were talking about, was the idea is, can you plant a crop in here that is going to build your nitrogen for the next year? So what is the, who can tell me that's farming, what's the price of nitrogen next year? What's it going to cost an acre to put in a corn crop? More. Huh? More.
130 bucks.
130, 150. It depends on, you know, how much you're going to put on, but it's really, really expensive. You know, think about the idea of getting this established. This is Pukey establishment, okay, because we didn't get a rain for a month after we put it in. But imagine if we got this seeded at the right time and managed it correctly, you know, the ability to grow 150 or 180 pounds of nitrogen. And next year, all you do is you shift your twin row over and you put it right in the middle, and now you've just reduced your input cost, you know, by, I don't know, you pick the number 75, 80%. You're going to see some stuff over in that other plot when it comes to nitrogen and cohabiting with other plants. It's going to, it'll make an impact, I guess, when you start to see stuff like this. So that's essentially the skinny and the concept is, you know, and these aren't the only things that we can do. I mean, when I look at the 90-inch window, I know Joe is wanting to make a 90-inch stock cropper to go through this, and I think when you see this, I think this is probably about as skinny as what we can go to get good forage growth. Now, we're going to split up, and I just want everybody to wander for 10 minutes probably through it, so you can just go through it and see what I'm talking about. But you'll see the differences. A 60-inch gap seems like a big one, but when you put it in twin rows, especially, it covers it up really fast too. So you'll see significantly less growth just from it's not getting enough sunlight in. But I really like the 90-inch, or maybe something in between 60 or 90-inch, maybe as a concept for next year. But you know, the idea of maybe making very small, very lightweight, low-cost stock croppers that can come through and graze this type of a schematic as well. So there's all sorts of different options and ideas, and we had, I mean, I don't know, it's just, I get really, really excited when I come out and look at this stuff. So I think the best thing to do is to just let you kind of wander through, and it's a long ways across. If you kind of stick with me, and I'll try to make comments as we go through, but there's some really, really neat things if we want to do. Rick, if you want to say anything, you got your shovel out. I don't want to skip over you here.
Just talking about the livestock aspect of this whole thing that Zach has going on here, is your gains out of your livestock basically come out of your feed values of the whatever they're eating. And when you start adding this diversity in here, if you're measuring sugar contents in your plants, your sugar content goes up very rapidly when you start mixing things together. It's a synergistic system they get. We use Brix readers on our farm to measure them, and we'll go from a 5 to 7 on a plant like this that's monoculturally planted. And then when we get into where there's no fertility at all, but all we have is the diversity feeding the plants all the nutrients they need, we don't see a yield loss at all, but we'll see the sugar level of those plants skyrocket up, which means the system below the ground is functioning properly. We've got a lot of acres that we haven't been fertilizing now. I don't know, there's probably a couple thousand of them this year that haven't been fertilized, and they actually look like they're probably going to be the highest yielders on the farm. So the system works. And we got to look at our soils, and what Zach's doing here is showing you the above ground stuff, but it's all what's happening is the stuff below the ground that's making all this stuff happen. And you got to have the health below the ground feeding the system. You guys here in Iowa are very, very fortunate because you're very black dirt and stuff like that. It's a big buffer. Yeah. But it's about the sugar. We as humans eat complex sugars, carbohydrates. Insects eat simple sugars. They can't digest the carbohydrates. So when you get this whole system working like this, you can give up your insecticides and fungicides and all those things. You don't need them anymore. Now we're starting to talk about what Ricardo's talking about, and Joe's talking about. How can we do this with less so our profitability goes up?
Has anyone ever tried a triple row on a little bit wider spacing instead of a 2-row? Maybe just get it up a little bit more or something?
Not yet.
Would the nitrogen mix feed this year's crop or next year's crop?
I don't know. I mean, Rick probably knows more about than me, but I don't know with this level of growth if we're doing a lot of benefit here. But the idea, maybe it's both, but I think the assumption would be it would be building for next year, unless Rick wants to say otherwise.
Seeing anything in here?
Picture out here right now, this that right here.
In the vegetative state.
In the vegetative state, if you come up and grab one of these new roots like this right here, he's plumb full of sugar and tastes just like you're biting into a sugar. Honestly, there's a gob of them on there. They're releasing energy into the soil, which the energy feeds the biology, which gives you the nitrogen out of your system. So these guys will fix, in the vegetative state, a C4 plant will fix more nitrogen than any legume ever will. But it's only in the vegetative state, and this stuff here is about ready to go reproductive, if it isn't already. So now it's saying you can't have my nitrogen anymore, I'm going to keep it. But 2 weeks ago, this plant was feeding nitrogen to this plant through all the fungal components in the soil. The legumes are fixing nitrogen through the bacterial side of your soil. Bacteria is very green. Fungal is very green. So that you're going to get nitrogen out of this. You will get on the top of the next to get it.
What is that plant that you just dug out?
That looks like there was sorghum and sorghum Sudan. There's a couple different, and then soybeans are in this mix as well.
When I look at them, all I do is I look at it as a T4 plant. But it's really neat when you bite onto them roots. You never ever believe that all that stuff's gone in the soil. And it makes it kind of convinces you that there's a tremendous amount of energy up there that's getting converted by these. And we see all these wind towers out here generating energy. But if you take all the leaves on an acre of corn, there's more solar panels there that are generating energy than there ever is on them wind blades up there. So how are you harnessing it? How are you getting it back out?
What maturity? Have you tried different maturity? Like
So this is 100 day to 109.
you know, I don't know, it's a theory, but if you have the wider spacing and you're collecting more sunlight, you might not be able to advance the maturity. You might be able to plant
Oh yeah,
later corn.
yeah.
Because you'll see when, like, the strip intercrop, the outside rows are always mature.
Well,
You see it on a normal, you can try it on.
Well, and plus from a dry down standpoint, you just have all of these fins of air movement through. I mean, it does the same thing when it comes to plant stress. He's talking about lessening the need for fungicide. Your dew is going to come off quicker. You're not gonna have the canopy locked up, so you know it struggles to go into dark respiration at night. There's a whole bunch of things, and one of the things is you see way more less stress on the low side of this plot at 16,000, 25, and 36. The stress level of the plants go up. The ears look crappier, but on these 16,000, all the ears try to start growing more leaves because they have the space, and it's very apparent you see less of this the denser the canopy gets as you go through. So I'm going to shut up, but I want people just to wander here for a couple minutes and try to take a walk down through some of the blocks, and then we're going to try to coalesce back here in the next 5 to 7 minutes. And you can come back and look at this afterwards, as much as you want if you want to come out in the playpen. But I'll try to walk across, and if those that want to stay with me, if you don't want to come with, you can stay here. But I'm going to start traversing across here. Are there any other questions I should say? Bill,
On the, talking about light interception, does it matter if it's east-west rows or north-south rows or angles?
the answer I think is yes. North-south is the preferred method for this stuff. But I don't know. If you guys have any other Junior, would you say the same thing?
Yes, it needs to be north and south. From the guys that I've talked to, I've never done east to west, but from the guys that I've talked to, basically the crop right on the north side of your corn is going to get shade all year long. And if it's soybeans, you're going to have your furthest north soybeans are going to be, come harvest time, are going to be ready to go. But the soybeans right next to the corn that's standing are going to be green as a gold. So it does get more shade right there.
See this for Jason Locke's wheat soybean relay last year. He had east-west rows, and the north rows on the east-west rows, the north rows of the soybeans were shorter because they were just getting shaded a little bit more between the wheat, and this was directly after wheat harvest. The soybeans were probably a foot taller than the wheat stuff. So you've seen all that happening there. So I think this is the combination.
Yeah. Okay, let's get away from the sickles and let's
we've got plenty of time, so let's keep it informal. Just blurt it out if you'd like. So we'll just start with kind of funsies, thinking about bringing consumers to your field so you can tell your story to them. So you got to kind of have reasons and seasons and think about time and space, when things are going to come off, when you can start something and how long you can extend, reasons, compelling reasons for people to make the drive to your place. So Zach's got a couple different corns out here. He actually hand shelled. A neighbor had some Indian corn and he wasn't aware of the variety, hand shelled it, and it ended up being a very early, small, midget Indian corn. So he's got all these different colors out here of the corn, and I hear that he ruined your Memorial Day, is that right? He forced his family to come out and plant pumpkins on Memorial Day instead of going to the lake. So the end result is really voluptuous pumpkins. The only problem is it's August and they're orange, so some of them will be a little bit past season, but the pigs love them, and that's kind of fun to throw them in there. But when you start doing the mathematics here and thinking about seasons, we can change the algorithm by changing the spacing, the population, the timing of when we plant things. So I did the same algorithm 3 years ago, and we planted twin 15-foot sweet corn, so even wider, and we went in there and planted pumpkins about June 10th. I think June 20th in my area is just about right. So what happens is it takes very long for a soybean to come out and leaf out, and also a pumpkin. You know, it might be up in 6 days, but it doesn't really get big for about a month. So you can time it and plant 2 or 3 rows of pumpkins right down the middle here, and invite people to come out for a U-pick, and you can capture, like Ricardo was talking about, that full value pie, the full retail price, and you can actually outsource your labor, which is pretty good. But if it gets really hot, it becomes a challenge, just I know from experience. But anyway, think about that, 24,000 corn seeds. By giving it the space, corn has that like old heirloom want to really flex, so you might get multiple years of plant, but just say 24,000 ears, that's 2,000 dozen. In Indiana, if you have a roadside stand, you're going to get $4 or $5. And after a few days, people kind of get sick of it. They've went through the KO pectate, they're kind of over it. But there's a lot of people that have made brands. One's called My Grandpa's Sweet Corn. They're going to Carmel, Fisher, Zionsville, getting $12 a dozen. And they've grown that brand to now they have 30 acres of sweet corn, getting $12 a dozen. So imagine that math, 2,000 dozen, $12, it'll be 24,000 an acre at $4, quite a bit less. But if you have another entity, another thing me and Zach did, we ran down here, we both counted 70 or 80 pumpkins just in this corridor. So we did the math, and the revenue produced per acre at 50 cents a pound, you'd be over $10,000 an acre worth of pumpkins.
Do they freeze any of that corn?
What's that?
Do they freeze any of the corn?
You can. You just gotta do a lot of work, yeah.
I just did.
Because all that corn you buy at the grocery store, it's all from Mexico. That off-season frozen corn, and you people buy that all the time. And it's terrible too.
It doesn't
it's
taste
terrible.
good.
It's bad.
Yeah. The biggest secret in running a garden is just freshness. People aren't accustomed. We pick everything. You know, this whole world is ran by the distributors. They want everything like, you know, Baywatch bathing suits. When really we need to be right. And I don't know if you got that joke, maybe it was on Facebook. But anyway, doing something fresh and having a visual experience is how marketing works. They're going to tell people about it, go back, and I think this is a really glorious way to get people out there. Any questions specifically on this arrangement? So what we're going to do at our property back home, we're going to be bringing 2 of these Nano 2s, and we're going to begin a legacy project. So I've had an intern with a degree in sustainable agriculture from Purdue, and he's been planting stuff all year, and it's a lot of work. So we want to outsource that work through field trips. So we're going to have a lot of K through 3 field trips where we may have 127 first graders come out. We're also going to be talking to the nursing homes, retirement homes. So on the other side, the 75 to 90-year-olds are going to be coming out. And those capable will be giving a perennial crop. So maybe it's a blueberry plant, a raspberry plant, something like that. We can buy them in bulk when they're just at their root form very cheaply.
but we need somebody to put them in the ground. So we're going to pre-drill and pre-design these diversified algorithms that'll play out. Have the kid have artwork, a rock, a stake, a bracelet around the plant that they plant, and we're going to have them all plant at the same time. And if we have multiple field trips per day of both young and old, we pre-design, we can build this property out several acres through the hands of over 10,000 kids. But the most important thing is really figuring out this principle that if I move an animal over a cover crop or a perennial grass, that sheep is going to have the life intelligence to stick his head out and put his tongue right up to the plant and eat every little piece of vegetation that he can reach. And having that confidence, now I don't have the restraints. Oh man, I have Liberty Link soybeans, so I need to go, oh, they're out of Liberty. I need to go out to, oh, do you have Liberty? Like, this is the game we play. like Ricardo said. But if you have the natural algorithm figured out, it doesn't matter what you plant. If little Johnny just wants to be a butthole and he wants to plant apple tree instead of a raspberry bush, I probably won't rip it out of the ground because it doesn't matter, because the sheep will still eat the grass right next to whatever it is. So we can just plant whatever we want. And I think the value proposition for me in the investment of how cool that thing is that we create training wheels, right? So that root, I can buy a truckload of 10,000 root stock for say $5,000, not extremely expensive. So if I get $7 a kid, I only have 30 cents in cost of goods. My problem is, how much value am I going to get out of that root? Nothing for 3 years. But if we can use a stock cropper to maintain the vegetation, then we can sell the chickens, the sheep, the pigs in between there, and then we use it as training wheels for 3 or 4 years. Then we move those same things over here where we're designing, and then after we pick it is another whole value proposition in itself. So we did, or I didn't, or whatever, there's not a lot of sweet corn picked out here, but there's still feed value, right? So we could totally eat all of this vegetation. The pigs love the pumpkins, but we could also take the stock cropper after all the raspberries are down, some are on the ground, and then we can start value adding and say, this is raspberry pork. Oh, you don't like that on your palate? How about you try the blueberry chicken? And you just live in the fact that they are staining different stains, they have different flavor profiles, but more importantly, it just solves that riddle of how do we think ahead with perennials, how do we maintain the system and fill the gaps of value having that endeavor. So that's a little bit of the more that stuff. I'd like to get really dorky into the mathematics of expression and inflection. So let's walk down here and we'll look at these arrangements.
Do you think yummy wants
on the edge here? So this is 90-inch twin row corn and soybeans, and this is 60-inch corn and soybeans. And Zach and Juice went out when the corn was about hip high and actually took their hoe and just killed plants off to create light intrusion into the soybeans. And when you really put your dorky glasses on and start thinking about arrangement of what is going to win, we have to think about like an economist, right? I remember going to econ, I was probably hungover, and all I had to remember was the demand and supply on the graph. And they would say, if people, I don't know, I won't go there. But there's two different curves here that we got to be cognizant of. First is the expression graph. So the expression graph says that as we plant less and less seeds and give each one more forage, more sunlight, more CO2, more water, then that plant is going to grow and morph differently and produce exponentially more. So when we look at, okay, I want 200 bushel corn, I can grow that at 30,000. If I go to 20,000, I don't get 66% of that. I may get 94% of that. When I go down to 10, I won't get 33% of that. I may get 64% of that. And these aren't made up numbers. It's going to be just about right from my experience based on hybrid and other stuff like that. So as you go down that curve and you get down to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 corn plants, you're going to have these Gary Coleman plants that are shorter with more nodes, and each ear that comes out will grow leaves and it'll produce energy all around the plant, which will fire its most located area node to actually maybe even produce more ears than just one on each node. Little story, in 2017, I took a corn plant out of the field, 1197, when it just had emerged. Just dug it out with a shovel, put it in my garden, and I put about a 7-foot circle around it. My kids are now 7 and 6, but that summer, my 2-year-old, or he's 1.5, it's hot, we're potty training when he can be half naked all day. So his job was to just target practice, just marinate this single corn all summer. And it took 6 weeks from the time I got my first silk until I got my last silk. It was all said and done. I kept making Twitter videos. I thought maybe 10 would be max. 31 ears from that one corn plant. And it makes you start thinking about the mathematics of expression and the Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 2 plus 1, 3, 3 plus 2, 5. 5 plus previous number. It grows in all directions. So cell division happens with each cell division. So by thinking that way, we go to later maturing hybrids, later maturing soybeans to allow that math to play out and give each plant more space. And the magic happens when we are cognizant of the other point of the graph, the inflection point, or also just the amount of ding, if you will, the elasticity of inflection of the other entity. So you see it right here, you have 60-inch corn. 60-inch corn has 34-inch leaves, so the 34 next to the 34 will overlay leaves and actually hog all or nearly all the solar power for the soybeans. So we get a steep inflection point. So we may have 20 bushel better soybeans by just being cognizant that corn's leaves are this big, get it further away, allow that horsepower down, and I drive that other plant. So maybe I lose 10 bushel of corn, or $6 a bushel, that's $60. If I gain 20 bushel of a commodity that's worth $15, that's $300. So 300 minus 60 is a $240 competitive advantage by not being too greedy with the one entity. So we've got, as we add entities, we have to not just say, this is how I do A, this is how I do B, it's how do you do A, B better. And what's exciting about the stock cropper is we can have the diversity, we can prearrange, but it doesn't have to be just A and B, an industrial bulk commodity where we have no control of the end value of. We can have multi-species, multi-cover crops, and it's really exciting. You got anything you want to add on this thought?
One of the things I didn't mention in my conversation also is that the stock cropper produces vastly more energy than it requires to move it. And, you know, I was thinking like the 20th century of agriculture was all about separating stuff. Like you would take monocrop crop production, put it here, and then you would take animal production and you put it in a confinement over here, and then we have solar farms that everybody loves to hate now coming in over here. And that what you're doing with stock cropper is you're juxtaposing all three of those things and putting them all in the same place at the same time, as opposed to just separating every single thing. And when you separate things, that all of a sudden you have a cost associated with, you know, like Ricardo said, you're taking one problem and making it two separate problems. And somebody told me earlier in my career too, they're like, Joe, you know what one of the hardest engineering problems in agriculture is? It's manure. Because everybody knows they need it, but it's all water and it's expensive to move, and there's this, you know, problem where you can't afford to truck it anywhere. So it's like, all right, well, why are we... The answer is not like drag lines that are like 50 miles. The answer is that we just bring the animal back to the field.
Yes. Do you remember the movie, what was the movie where, Saturday Night Live, Animal House? Where the brick wall, or the van just goes into the brick wall? When we designed these CAFOs, we were thinking, oh, a CAFO on each farm. Well, the neighbors, or whatever it was, we ended up planting 4, 6, 8 CAFOs in the same space. So you can only efficiently move the manure 2 or 3 miles. So we have all these scenarios where we have a marching band just literally applying excessive amounts of manure to the same soil year after year after year.
So when did the industry go to CAFOs? When did that start happening?
So in 1997, 98, 99, the price of pork plummeted below $1. And it sustained itself there for a long time, and it literally, there's a lot of suicides, there's a lot of guys got out. And the years after that, we had tons of integrators kind of take on this farming as a service, whatever model you call it. But
How
now,
long do you have to go back when people raised pork outside?
well, I mean, go through South Dakota, all the huts. I mean, it was
Northern Iowa,
very,
that long, 30 years.
It was 30 years ago people still did.
Mid-90s.
So then the industry went south, and then the integrators got everybody into this new business model.
yeah. Now all the middle integrators are out. Our now is about 80% Tyson. They used to be 30% of our business about 4 years ago. If you own the shelf space, the thing that we don't realize when we talk about inflation is just everyone just calls it inflation, and now it's like a license to just screw you in every facet. So look at these big integrators. Their profit margin, Cargill put $8 billion to their bottom line, but the Grocery Association has had exponential profits as well. So you know, if we're not 50% of it, we're not that big.
I also think that there has to be something else other than like farmers market stuff too.
Yeah.
You know, like my father sells at the farmers market, does well, fine, it's a nice little business. You know, he doesn't really want to expand it at all, but like you're never gonna get. We have to somehow get into the grocery stores.
Yeah. Or alternative.
Right.
There are R&Ds out there working on that, of proving that your plants that are grown on a more soil-friendly style of farming have a higher nutrient level. And you hear about a lot of chest thumpers that stand in front of the microphone and say they have more nutrient-dense products coming off. And that's a given. I mean, that just works that way. But it's not necessarily about nutrient density. My soils are very nutrient dense. When I take and measure my soil content of total nutrients out there, I got between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds of nitrogen in every acre, 2,000 pounds of phosphorus in every acre. But when I look at the availability of your typical soil test, I might only have 17 pounds of available phosphorus, 35 pounds of nitrogen. So it's not available. So there's a lot of people stepping up to the space of going, is this nutrient in this plant available to the gut of the eater? And we've taken carrots out of fields in Tasmania when I was there and sent them in, and they were very nutrient dense. But when we sent them into the human gut biome people and asked them if those nutrients were available to the human gut biology, it was zero. Even though those carrots were perfect, and according to the FDA, they were perfect. And they demanded top dollar on the grocery shelf, but it was unavailable to us as eaters. So, and those companies are out there working very silently at getting those products onto the shelves. And it's got to be a little bit quiet right now, because if the pharmaceuticals and all that big guys come after you, they just bank you down to nothing. So you got to approach those things quietly.
Organic food has become such a joke, and such a huge industry too. When you go to the store and you look at these organic carrots, you know, that they sell you that are just like these weird colored, engineered organic carrots that taste bad. Or you look at these organic strawberries that cost no more than non-organic strawberries, because they're all hydroponic, right? And people forget that like the soil is the root of nutrients, and that all of these bland, terrible hydroponic tomatoes and fruits and stuff that people are eating, it's just, I think people are over it. They're hungry for nutrients. And I mean, when I was talking with Jason about, so in Indiana, they have this system for Muncie Meats where it's like an automated refrigerator locker, and then you go in an app and you buy the meat, and then you just drive to this location and you open up your locker and grab your meat or whatever. But so I was like, well, why couldn't a farm like this just have one of these up by the road? I don't know if there's licensing aspects associated with actually running a business or whatnot, where you have the stock croppers, and the stock croppers actually provide the energy to power the freezer thing up here, and then the freezer thing that's up there also is maybe a battery storage system where we're retaining energy, the excess energy that we're producing with the stock cropper system, which is like a solar farm. And then you could like power that, but you could also power your home or something, or charge a vehicle from that at the same time, because you're just going to be producing way excess electricity of what you need.
The stock cropper system, and really, we've looked at other concepts today that have been excited about that we started with. It was the idea of having plants feed animals and animals feeding plants. So the cycle that we've set up here is that it's basically a racetrack pattern, okay? So both of these barns came down on a cool season pass that we planted the first week of May on this other side of the row. Took about 30 days for it to get through. We moved the barn 3 times a day, so the animals are always moving into fresh vegetation. And so now this is, we launched the last week of June, we went down, we're coming back. And so the idea is that, it looks like we've really impacted stuff here, which we have, but if you look down there to the end, you can see that the regrowth is already coming. So one of the things I love about this system versus the conventional system with livestock is that there's a big concern about water quality, what happens to the manure when we put it out. With this system, the manure's getting sucked right back up. And we're going to have drone footage later this week, and you'll be able to see, I can see it standing up here, the difference. There's no nitrogen on this sorghum Sudan grass, and it's markedly greener already. You can see the nitrogen's getting taken up and held. Where if you compare that versus walking her out at the end of October or November, there's nothing holding it like there is in this system. So the idea is we run this racetrack, we run it twice around if we were going to finish the hog period. That's why we have lambs and pigs and chickens out here, is because we can finish lambs and pigs in about 4 months, and we can do 2 turns of chickens in the chicken tractor. So the barn that you're right here, this is the original barn that Sheldon and Juice and I built together in about 10 days, the first week of June in 2020. This is what we call the ClusterCluck 5000. The first year we pulled it with a winch on a tractor. We've got the sheep up front, we've got the raised floors, the ability to lock them up when you have inclement weather. I can tell you, the pigs make a heck of a mess when it rains, and you don't have the ability to have them locked up. And so if we know we get a big rain coming, we usually close them up for the night and let stuff dry out and then let them back out. We also have rung the pigs, so you can see the nose rings that they have in. That helps keep them from doing the rooting as well. Yeah, and then the chickens in the back, the big change with this year is that we finally have the ClusterCluck 5000 in its full glory, where the wagon train is all hitched together. The chickens used to be separate. We used to move them by hand. Now we built this rough hitch here to pull these Saladin style chicken tractors, and now the entire thing moves as one solid unit. So the ClusterCluck Nano, it was the iteration we came out last year. This is the first Dawn-built machine. So this one has solar panels up on top. There's 4 of them. We've got 4 batteries on board for the electric advancement. We've got 32 gallons of water storage, so we really only need to fill this about every 2 or 3 days to bring out and shore with a UTV. We have 110 gallons on that one, and they match up with the animal density rate, about needing it every 2 or 3 days to refill the water. So we've got, the idea with this one was to make a smaller one, to make it easier to do the autonomous piece, and then have basically a small ruminant in front with chickens in the back. And because it is easier not having the hogs in the system and dealing with the rooting. So that's why we went this route. So this is the barn last year that got to the point where we could do programmable moves, but we couldn't steer it. So this year, if you see in the center of the barn here, we have 2 GPS pucks. So we have dual GPS receivers. We also have an AT&T data connection to give us RTK correction through the Course network, for those of you that are familiar with that. And now we have the functionality with an Oasis controller on board, that this thing will talk to my cell phone, and when I tell it to, when I hit start on my application, this thing will move a prescribed set of moves. We also have the ability to do it over time, so if we want to set a move at 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and then have it go to rest for the rest of the day, we can completely customize all of that stuff. Joe, what am I forgetting? I feel like I'm talking faster stuff.
Fluffer?
Oh, the favorite part, you guys are going to be the first ones to see one of the, I think, the coolest innovations. If you've ever had chicken tractors, one of the biggest problems is that, especially if you're moving autonomously, the chickens are really stupid, okay? And they get caught in the back of the chicken tractor, and you can run them over and kill them because they don't know to move. These are almost full grown. They're half trained, so they know when they hear things moving, they'll run to the front of the thing. But what we got set up this week, I call the chicken fluffer, and it's a we took a windshield wiper motor and a stick and welded some, or screwed some pieces of rubber strapping to it. And so we tied it actually into the controller, so before the barn starts to move, the computer kicks the fluffer on and scares the chickens away from the back, so we don't have any issue with that. So, anything else for questions before I go to move things here and demonstrate this thing? Hopefully taking off. Everything worked this morning. Let me just. Any questions?
So the new one has half the bill of material cost of this first one, and then I think that there could be still another 30% reduction in the bill of material cost from the new one yet.
Yeah.
So there's going to be substantial reduction in the cost of goods sold.
So I'm going to go ahead and hop down here. And so Joe and his team at Dawn have actually made the ClusterCluck app for my iPhone. And so I load it up and I can set exactly how far I want it to move, when I want it to move. And so I'm going to hit go here. And if for those in the back, you should see the chicken fluffer kick into gear. And then it'll pause a little bit and then it should move front forwards to the width of the pen, which is about 8 feet. So here goes nothing. So the barn will kick in right about now. And there she creeps. So it's going to take roughly about 3 minutes to make this move. And we do that speed so that it's really easy on the animals. The new barn moves a little bit faster. The gear ratios are different. This barn is like a skid steer in the fact that there are 2 chain drives on each side. And it gets the direction signal from the GPS and it will stop and make sudden corrections just like a tractor would in the field. We gave it a, so what I did was I came out here and got the GPS heading that I planted my corn on, and then we've loaded that heading into the app, and so that is what it is steering towards here. So I just had a question about predators. We have been doing this for 2.5 years, and we have not lost a single thing to a coyote, a fox, a mink. I think we're lucky. We've got coyotes and fox all over here. Juice is the master of beasts, I call him. He traps a lot, so we catch raccoons and skunk to try to limit stuff, but we have a lot of predators around us. And but I think the design, having a tight fit, these seals that you see are imperative to help and keep stuff out. I also think there might be something to the fact that there's other species here that they don't like screwing with. The fact that the barns are here, the fact there's pigs and sheep, that's the one thing that really makes sense to me.
You don't have any motion lights or anything?
No. So eventually we'll add probably some sound stuff as well to this. We should be getting pretty close to the stop here. Let's see if it behaves.
If you slow this down enough, Jack, will they?
There we go. Hold on. There's the move. So that was 8 feet right there.
So if you slow it down enough, will they eat this up off the ground entirely?
Oh yeah, if we let it sit here for sure, they comb all of that stuff out. Now, I think there's stuff left here because we were doing fast movements yesterday when we were doing the testing. Because normally you can see right there, it doesn't look like that, but they have time to sit. So now you can see the chickens, they're going nuts for if there's any flies or grasshoppers. When we had grasshoppers terrible a couple weeks ago, and when we do the move, the chickens would just go crazy eating grasshoppers in the system, which was really fun to watch. So yeah, so that's the movement of the ClusterCluck Nano. So the first one here, I'm on. So now I'm switching over to the ClusterCluck 5000. And this one is programmed, I think, just to move for 10 seconds for demonstration purposes today. Let's see here, I gotta open my app back up. Okay. Oh, I gotta shut the app down and restart it. Forget my order here. Okay, so now we're going to attempt to move this thing for 10 seconds, and you can see how the whole wagon train will take off. So we have this winch anchored about 200 feet that way with a fence post. In the future, I see when we get these barns lighter, we can just have kits that have winch anchors. You can screw them with an impact wrench, and the barn will just go in a perfect straight line. So there's 10 seconds, and that's the autonomous movement of the ClusterCluck 5000. And did we kill any chickens, Dad? All right, good stuff. What's that? Yeah, they get trained when they're really young. That's when you really need the fluffer to keep them moving off the backside. So, I think back 30 months ago when Sheldon and Lance and I cooked this up, if it ever would have got to this point, where we would have 3 barns on site working off of my cell phone, and I'll be honest, I didn't think it would probably happen. So yesterday was a really, really great day. I want to recognize everybody that's contributed to the design of all this, Sheldon, Lance, Joe and his team at Don. It's just really, really special to see this actually come to fruition, to have a dream, and have people show up to want to see it and be interested. So, yeah, thank you. So, we're running up against the lunch wagon here. So I think I'd like to move stuff. Is there any other questions? Go ahead.
So why are the chickens separate from like the sheep and pig and stuff?
So the question is, why do I have the animals segregated? Because they all behave a little bit differently, and there's an order to the system. So this is the lawnmower system. This is a little bit of tillage, and then kind of scrapping what the sheep don't eat. And then if you're familiar with a field cultivator, I call the chickens kind of my leveling basket on the back, where they do the scratching and they really tear the vegetation apart. If you look at the difference in the vegetation here, they kind of thrash everything out and allows for everything to go back. We've got 3 different types on this one, 3 different types of livestock with manure. Put it out here. Now, one thing I didn't say, and I think it's an important point that I want to cover. A lot of people look at this saying, this isn't possible to scale, or you can't do this and grow all the food that we need in the state of Iowa. So here's some fun with numbers about what it would take to make stock cropping replace all the pork in the state of Iowa. So currently we grow 25 million head of hogs annually in Iowa. If you gave me 13 counties in Iowa with 250,000 crop acres and we did this system with this stocking rate, 13 counties, we could grow all the hogs that Iowa needs in a 4-month period. We grow 25 million. So I need 13 counties out of 99. And a lot of people said this won't work in hills. We got a lot of flat black ground where we could have ClusterClucks running up and down the place. And for the investors in the room that I'm probably plugging today, that math works out to 1.1 ClusterCluck 5, or 1.1 million ClusterCluck 5000s that we would need to build to. Now, I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but the idea that people put out and say, "Oh, you can never do this," nonsense. These things are possible. These arrangements make it possible, and I'm just excited for where the team is going to go with figuring this stuff out.
I mean, if you look at how much does it cost to, I guess my question is, if you look at the cost to construct and maintain a typical confinement facility, where do we have to be in terms of the return on investment to the point where you could actually get this done for a financially competitive number relative to building and maintaining a confinement facility for the same number of costs?
Yeah, so I don't have those numbers specifically on that example, but it is not very far off from some of the initial stuff I've done. And especially if you can find out a way to make these things simpler and cheaper, it becomes very feasible. With this system, we don't need a 10,000 gallon Hooley manure spreader going across the field, right? These things are spreading it for us. There's all sorts of advantages. We're eliminating the need for things and just doing things more intelligently. And setting the crop up next year, we're going to come where all of this chicken crap is. We're going to come right back, and we're going to grow some Malaysian corn in the strip next year, or beans, or whatever other crop that we want to grow into here. And we're not going to need any additional fertility, or very, very little, maybe a little bit of extra nitrogen. We've done a little work on the nutrient loads, and we're almost, I think, to about nutrient removal for a corn crop with the credit we have with the animals and the stocking rates we have in the ClusterCluck 5000. So, Rick.
Zach, you built one for egg layers?
So the question is, have we built one for egg layers? We haven't, but we will be. So one of the things I didn't say is that we have full intentions to make a consumer version of this that can go in backyards where people can have, autonomous chicken broilers or hen tractors roaming around. So,
How about cattle?
how about cattle? Last year we had the ClusterCluck Max 9. We put cattle out in. Cattle can work I just don't know. I don't know a lot about cattle, but I don't know if cattle make as much sense. I think they can be. I think there's other options like if you're familiar with no fence, where they have the collars. I think that stuff probably makes more sense for a bigger herd animal like that. Plus, you can't finish everything annually like you can. You got a distance with the cows. So, any other questions before we go up to lunch? I know the taco guys are going to be wanting me to get you up there. So, when we get up there, we're going to also get the brand new version out, and we're going to set that thing on the path to make some movements so you can move as well, and maybe talk a little bit about it when we get up there. So.
Is your death loss comparably lower compared to confinement?
So the question is death loss versus confinement. Over doing this for 3 years, we've lost one pig, and I think that pig showed up with PRRS. You know, when we got it, it was sick from the beginning. No, and I don't know if that's just density or what. We have had to give some pig shots. We've had some pigs get sick. But you know, they bounce right back. It's not, you know, not that we're saying we're completely antibiotic free here. If I've got a sick animal, I'm going to treat a sick animal. And one of the things with, you know, that I want from a transparency point with consumers is I want consumers to see all this stuff. So we want cameras in all these barns. So theoretically, if you buy stock cropper meat in the future, you can have a QR code that takes you to the exact animal or the exact barn and be able to watch exactly how that animal's being raised the whole way through. So. Rick, did you have something?
As I go to these field days every year and we see these innovative farmers like what we got going on here, Jason's field day over there at his place, it's very, very amazing. And I always hear somebody ask whoever has the field day, is this scalable to agriculture? And my first response all the time when I get asked that on my farm is, do you want to scale it to your size or do you want to scale it to your income? And do you want to scale it to your risk-reward faction that causes you not to sleep at night? So if we scale it to our income, it's very, very easy to scale these things. But if you're sitting on 3,000 acres or 5,000 acres or bigger, it's going to be hard to scale this because you don't have enough management tools to make it work, even though we try to get the technology to make it work. We have to be happy with an income that we want to be happy with and scale to those things.
Yeah, and in doing so, maybe actually start to repopulate rural areas with more farms, and that's why we started this, 30 months ago. So, with that, that's a good place to end. Let's go up and get some food. I'm hungry. I'm sure all of you are too. We can talk more.